I was just out walking here with my best buddy Bruno, right here, Bruno. And Bruno kind of telepathically suggested to me, hey, why don't you make a video about the many misconceptions and myths related to estrogen? A lot of people, he noted that a lot of people in the bodybuilding and fitness world have a lot of false beliefs about estrogen. They paint it to be a very terrible hormone. And as with everything, there's good and bad about everything, right? Bruno, do you agree with that? Okay. Anyway, okay, I'll let Bruno go. Okay, so let's talk about some of the many myths about estrogen. Estrogen is frequently known as the female hormone, which itself is a misnomer because estrogen is made in men and women's body, although it is the predominant hormone in women. Now, estrogen is a general term because there are actually three types of estrogen. There's estrone. Estrone is usually found in older women. After the menopause, the ovaries tend to produce less estrogen, and this stuff called estrone continues to be made, especially through the aromatization process, where the androgens produced in a woman's body are converted into estrogen, and the particular type of estrogen that dominates in older women is called estrone. Then there's one called estriol, Estriol. That's a very weak form of estrogen, and that's usually found in mostly pregnant women. So we could kind of like, let's eliminate both of those forms of estrogen, estrone and estriol. Let's talk about the particular estrogen that people think of when they think about estrogen, which is the most potent form. It's called estradiol, or E2. Estradiol is the most potent form, the dominant form of estrogen. This is the form produced in younger women, and this is the form produced in men. Men produce estrogen largely through the process of aromatization, which involves the enzyme aromatase, which is found ubiquitously throughout the male body, muscles, brain, particularly in body fat. Peripheral fat stores, such as the arms and legs, are loaded with aromatase. Aromatase converts circulating androgens, such as testosterone, into estrogen. Now, you might say, well, since it's found in peripheral fat stores, does that mean that the more body fat a man has, the more estrogen he produces? That assumption would be correct. The higher the body fat, the greater the production of estrogen in men. Now, in bodybuilding, estrogen has a really bad reputation because it's associated with increased subcutaneous fat, which is the fat just below the skin. It's also associated with side effects such as gynecomastia, which is the formation of male breast tissue, and also the retention of water. So all that stuff is basically true, but it has to do with elevated estrogen levels. Men who use, let's say, high-dose anabolic steroid regimes, not all steroids can be converted to estrogen. For example, steroids based on the dihydrotestosterone structure, or the DHT structure, they cannot be converted into estrogen. But testosterone and many other androgens can be converted into estrogen through the action of the aromatase enzyme. If you're on a very high dose anabolic steroid program and you're using a lot of testosterone or steroids that can be converted to estrogen through aromatase, they've had, in studies, they've shown men who do this to have higher estrogen levels than women, actually higher estrogen levels than women. When the estrogen levels get that high, then you can get the side effects. In recent years, so not so recent years, bodybuilders have become familiar with the effects of elevated estrogen, and they've taken measures to curtail that. One of the original ones was a drug called Teslac, and then later on came tamoxifen citrate, or Navadex. Navadex works by blocking estrogen receptors. It doesn't block the production of estrogen, but it blocks the receptors that estrogen must interact with. And a little known fact is, if you do have gynecomastia, the best treatment for it, from a drug point of view, is actually Navadex. It works better than the aromatase inhibitors that a lot of people use to treat gyno. That's a little factoid for you. But there is actually two types of let me backtrack. There's a problem with using some of these so-called estrogen blocking drugs, or estrogen inhibitors, Besides Navadex, which blocks the estrogen receptors, the other main type of drug used to control estrogen are called aromatase inhibitors. Aromatase inhibitors, an example of which is, oh God, I can't even remember the name of it. There's a number of them, Levotrol, and there's a couple of them, Femara. Uh, but anyway, Arimidex, that's what I was trying to think of, Arimidex, which is an anastrozole. It didn't come to me right away, but that's probably the most popular one. Both the Navadex and the aromatase inhibitors, the actual medical indications for these drugs are to treat breast cancer, mainly in women, postmenopausal older women. The standard treatment is to provide them with aromatase inhibitors. It used to be Navadex, but lately aromatase inhibitors have taken over. They're very potent drugs. For example, Arimidex, which is probably one of the more popular aromatase inhibitors, it actually can lower estrogen by as much as 80 to 90%. About 80, I think about 80% if I remember correctly. I will get to this in a minute, but I do believe that a lot of the estrogen inhibiting drugs, such as Arimidex, are greatly overused, especially in testosterone replacement therapy. I'll discuss why and explain why I think this is true. Now, estrogen, even though it has this bad reputation, it does do a lot of good things. In fact, one theory of why women live longer than men is because they have higher estrogen levels. Among the effects of estrogen are that it tends to promote greater production of high-density lipoprotein, or HDL. HDL is sometimes called the good cholesterol because it helps pull excess cholesterol out of the blood vessels back to the liver, where the cholesterol is converted to bile and then excreted. Also, estrogen is known to maintain higher levels of nitric oxide in the blood vessels, and what this does is it keeps the blood vessels flexible and supple. When blood vessels are flexible and supple, there's less chance of atherosclerosis, or so-called hardening the arteries. It actually doesn't happen if the arteries are maintained, flexibility is maintained in the arteries, and this is done by nitric oxide, and estrogen stimulates nitric oxide. So you could say it's a combination of the favorable effects of estrogen on blood lipids in women and also the increased nitric oxide. This, more than anything else, probably explains why women never have any type of serious cardiovascular disease until they reach menopausal age, when their estrogen levels go down. Then they become as prone to cardiovascular disease as men. I should also point out that a couple of interesting things. First of all, while there's only one androgen receptor, there's only one androgen receptor which interacts with testosterone and steroids and all that stuff, but there's actually two estrogen receptors. They're called estrogen receptor A and estrogen receptor B, and interestingly enough, these receptors have some more or less opposite effects. I mean, they both do important things, but I'll give you an example. In the prostate gland, estrogen receptor A is known to stimulate the growth of prostate tumors. On the other hand, estrogen receptor B tends to nullify the growth of tumors. So if you could somehow stimulate estrogen receptor B, it would more or less nullify the effects of estrogen receptor A in promoting prostate cancer. This would be like a selective estrogen receptor modulator effect. And one example of a food that does that, and I know people won't like to hear this, is soy. The isoflavones in soy, such as genistein, actually are specific for estrogen receptor B. And when you stimulate estrogen receptor B, you nullify the possible prostate cancer promoting effects of estrogen receptor A. Now, I'll say real fast that this notion that soy is highly estrogenic, it causes estrogen side effects, is just pure bullshit. It has to do with the quantity. If you overeat or overconsume soy products, yes, you will have an estrogen effect, but it takes a lot to do that. If you take small amounts of soy, such as soy protein or certain soy foods, you're not going to get any negative effects on testosterone, no estrogenic effects. Keep in mind that the isoflavones found in soy are only 1/10,000th of the potency of actual estrogen. So it takes a hell of a lot of soy to really produce estrogen related effects, contrary to what you read on the internet and all these so-called science websites. It's all bullshit. Anyway, again, if only the dose determines the poison. An interesting thing about estrogen is that it increases fat oxidation, just the opposite of what most people believe. In fact, women are known to burn more fat when they exercise because of their higher estrogen levels. Again, an excess of estrogen will probably does stimulate subcutaneous fat or fat around the skin, but estrogen itself helps to oxidize the deeper fat stores in the body, including intramuscular fat stores, including visceral fat stores, which is the fat that kind of surrounds your internal organs. In fact, they did a study a couple of years ago. It was a study of low testosterone in older men. And this particular study didn't really have any important revelations except for one. What they found is that older men who are low in testosterone are always or usually also deficient in estrogen. And it's the deficiency in estrogen rather than deficiency in testosterone that causes the accumulation of fat around the waist as men age. Now, I should also point out that there's a theory that as men get older, if they have higher levels of body fat, the testosterone goes down 1 to 2% every year past the age of about 35, but estrogen levels continue to be produced from whatever testosterone remains. And one theory is that this estrogen produced, the imbalance between testosterone and estrogen in older men in favor of estrogen, that many people believe that estrogen stimulates prostate cancer. Because as I said earlier, stimulation of estrogen receptor A in the prostate definitely does stimulate tumor proliferation. However, the problem with this is that whether a man is fat or not, as his testosterone goes down with age, his estrogen will also drop. So if his testosterone gets low enough, he'll be low in both testosterone and estrogen. And this can affect not only the fat around the waist, but even though testosterone is the main or primary libido hormone, in other words, your sex drive is in both sexes, male and female, is based on testosterone. However, in the brain, estrogen, and this is not clear, nobody really knows how it does this, but estrogen in the brain seems to work with testosterone in increasing libido in men. So in other words, if your estrogen gets too low, your sex drive is going to drop. Estrogen does not have an effect on erectile potency, however. That's more related to testosterone and nitric oxide. But in the brain, estrogen seems to have an effect on male libido. I should also point out that estrogen is involved in exercise recovery. Women tend to recover better from exercise than men because of their higher estrogen levels. As I said earlier, they also burn more fat when they train, also because of the estrogen levels. And the higher estrogen levels also explain why women who go into endurance sports often excel, because they can tap into their fat stores more readily than men, and this spares muscle glycogen, allows them to have more endurance in long-distance events such as swimming or running. And an interesting effect, which I wrote about a couple of years ago, they found out that estrogen is actually anabolic. In other words, the bodybuilders who take these drugs like aromatase inhibitors or Navadex and go overboard and lower their estrogen to very low levels are actually hurting themselves when it comes to muscle growth. And let me explain why. It turns out those estrogen receptor B, the estrogen receptor B, remember there's two types of estrogen receptors. Estrogen receptor B stimulates the activity of muscle stem cells called satellite cells that are involved in the repair and the hypertrophy of muscle. In other words, by stimulating estrogen receptor B, you promote the activity of these satellite cells, which translates into greater muscle growth. So if you take drugs and lower your estrogen level too low, you can also adversely affect the muscle gains. They didn't know this until a couple of years ago. Now, a lot of doctors will, when they put men on testosterone replacement therapy, will automatically also prescribe an aromatase inhibitor such as Arimidex. Now, if the patient involved has taken a blood test and shows elevated estrogen levels, and when I elevated, I mean, let's say higher than 40 picograms per nanometer. The optimal range for estrogen in men is between 20 and 30, as judged by what they call a high sensitivity estrogen blood test. Now, if a man who's about to undergo testosterone replacement therapy shows elevated estrogen levels, physician will very often also prescribe an aromatase inhibitor such as Arimidex to control the estrogen. However, this is okay for short-term use, but as the person stays on testosterone therapy, the dose of Arimidex or whatever aromatase inhibitor has been prescribed should be cut down considerably, because very often the initial prescription calls for 1 milligram a day of Arimidex, and that's the same amount they give to women with breast cancer. This particular dose, 1 milligram a day of estrogen of Arimidex, almost completely knocks out estrogen, and if you continue to do this, you're going to have estrogen deficiency effects. So you could start out at, let's say, 1 milligram of Arimidex just to get the higher estrogen levels down. Then when they come down to a range of 20 to 30, you could still take the Arimidex, but you want to cut it down to maybe a half to a quarter tablet only twice a week, and that'll maintain estrogen levels. You don't need much Arimidex to control estrogen. And as I said, the ideal level for estrogen in male is between 20 and 30, as judged by the high estrogen sensitivity test. One bad thing about taking the estrogen inhibitors when you're taking testosterone normally has a beneficial effect on cardiovascular function, but when you take it with an estrogen blocker, much of the benefit disappears, because estrogen, a lot of the benefit related to testosterone is caused by the conversion of testosterone into estrogen by way of aromatase. And when you block the aromatase enzyme, this protection offered by testosterone disappears. So again, you're eliminating a lot of the cardiovascular protection offered by testosterone if you also take an aromatase inhibitor with it. Also, you should know that estrogen also works in concert with insulin-like growth factor 1, which is an anabolic hormone. If your estrogen levels get too low, there'll be an interference with the production of insulin-like growth factor 1, which is another way that having too low a level of estrogen will adversely affect your muscle gains. So I think also there was a recent study. Trying to find it. Well, I don't have it here. There was a recent study of men with heart failure, older men with heart failure. They found that having excess estrogen increased the risk of death in men with heart failure by 371%. However, having too little estrogen also increased the risk of death for men with heart failure by 161%. So, what do you take home from that? You take home from that you want to stay in the best area, or the optimal estrogen range, which again would be 20 to 30. So estrogen also maintains neurons. There's a theory that having sufficient estrogen will help prevent brain degenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. So that's still another reason for men to maintain your estrogen levels between 20 and 30. And don't believe all the hype about how any level of estrogen is bad for you. Now you know differently, and be careful about those aromatase inhibitors. Don't go overboard on them. And, if you're on testosterone replacement therapy, have your blood tested regularly and make sure you have a high sensitivity estrogen test to make sure you're in that optimal range of 20 to 30. So that's about it for estrogen. If you want more information on nutrition, supplements, exercise science, fat loss techniques that really work, hormonal therapy, including related to testosterone and estrogen, ergogenic aids, anti-aging research, many other topics. Subscribe today to my Applied Metabolics newsletter, www.appliedmetabolics.com. There's no better information anywhere, I guarantee you. It's written in plain English, unlike similar digital publications, which I've looked at. Many of these publications, they're written by academics, some of these guys with the PhDs and MDs, and they write like they're writing for medical journals. It's like wading through thick mud. They're very difficult to read, and I doubt if anyone will get past the first paragraph unless you have an intensive science background. And my newsletter is written in plain English. It's written in magazine style. It's written on a 6th grade reading level, so anybody could understand it. And I guarantee no matter what your level of knowledge or education, you will learn something new in every issue of Applied Metabolics. 40 to 50 pages of solid, evidence-based information every month. And I impart to you all the tricks and secrets, if you want to call it that I've learned over 56 years of constant study and training experience, which nobody can match. None of the people with other publications. I have more experience than all of them put together. Trust me on that. www.appliedmetabolics.com. Subscribe today. You saw my buddy Bruno at the beginning of this video. He is my best friend. He's one of the few beings that I trust implicitly. If you want to have a best friend too, go to your local shelter, adopt a dog. You won't be sorry. They cheer me up when I say I can't say enough good things about dogs. Take care.